But today, France is making headlines for something very different. Its national debt. It has reached a record 3.4 trillion euros.
France's 3.4 trillion euro public debt, roughly $4 trillion, stands at 115.6% of its GDP, nearly double the European Union's fiscal limit. This isn't just a number. It's a slow-motion collapse, decades in the making, exposing the hypocrisy of a nation that once lectured the world, particularly Africa, on economic virtue. While France drowns in its own financial mismanagement, Africa is quietly rewriting the rules of global economics, turning the tables on a fading empire. The irony is stark. The preacher of fiscal discipline is now the one on trial, and Africa, long dismissed as dependent, is emerging as a model of resilience, a legacy of denial since 1973. France has not balanced a single budget, 52 years of spending beyond its means. Every president, regardless of political stripe, has piled on more debt, masking it as economic sophistication. The cracks appeared during the COVID-19 pandemic, when France unleashed billions in lockdown relief and health subsidies. Necessary at the time, the spending became a habit. The 2022 Russian gas crisis deepened the hole, with Paris subsidizing energy bills to avoid protests, evaporating billions more. Today, interest payments on this debt exceed 67 billion euros annually, surpassing the nation's education budget. Debt is no longer a tool, it's a parasite. This isn't just financial, it's cultural. France, once known for revolutions, now revolts against reality. When outgoing Prime Minister François Bayrou proposed a 44 billion euro austerity plan, strikes erupted nationwide, forcing him out. His successor, Sébastien Lecornu, faces a fractured government unable to pass a budget without chaos. The streets of Paris, Marseille, and Lyon brim with anger. Workers protest inflation, pensioners decry taxes, and youth demand jobs. France's refusal to face the consequences of decades of borrowed comfort reveals a deeper rot. A nation that once preached superiority now fears its own mirror. The hypocrisy of empire. For decades, France positioned itself as the world's economic moralist, especially toward Africa. In the 1980s and 1990s, during Africa's debt crises, France, through the IMF and World Bank, enforced structural adjustment programs. African nations were told their problems stemmed from overspending, not colonial exploitation or unfair trade. The solution? Social programs remove fuel subsidies, privatize assets, and open markets to foreign firms, often French ones. Hospitals crumbled, education faltered, and currencies devalued, leaving millions in poverty. France called it discipline. Now, the roles are reversed. France's own overspending mirrors the indiscipline it once condemned. Yet, instead of swallowing the austerity it prescribed to Africa, France blames external crises, wars, pandemics, unique conditions. When African nations borrowed for infrastructure, it was labeled reckless. When France borrows for welfare, it's strategic. The double standard is glaring. Investors now treat France's bonds with the skepticism once reserved for African economies, whispering of instability and unpredictability. The empire that exported fear is now tasting it. This hypocrisy runs deeper than numbers. France's economic dominance over Africa, through mechanisms like the CFA franc and French-backed loans, was colonialism by another name. Control was disguised as cooperation, oppression as partnership. African nations were kept dependent, their resources funneled to French corporations while Paris preached fiscal prudence. But as France's finances implode, its grip weakens. African leaders see the emperor faltering, and the illusion of European superiority is crumbling. Africa's quiet revolution. France's crisis is not just its own, it's Africa's opportunity. While Paris begs for leniency from Brussels, African nations are rejecting the old rules. Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré exemplifies this shift. Refusing Western loans tied to reforms, he redirected mineral revenues into food production and industry. Once labeled one of the world's poorest nations, Burkina Faso now supplies grain to its neighbors, proving a nation that feeds itself need not be in Niger. The rejection of French control over uranium marks a financial declaration of independence. For decades, France paid minimal prices for uranium that powered its nuclear plants while Niger remained in darkness. Now, backed by the Sahel Military Alliance, Niger renegotiates contracts with newfound confidence. The message is clear. The era of extraction is over. Mozambique's President Daniel Chapo is another example, championing the $6 billion Mimfandankua hydropower project through multi-country partnerships that prioritize African interests. Ghana refines its own gold and cocoa, Rwanda builds digital infrastructure, and Kenya ties loans to tangible projects like ports and data centers. These are not just economic choices, they're acts of liberation. Across the continent, the mindset is shifting. Financial literacy and domestic investment are becoming political movements. Young Africans no longer seek to borrow, they seek to own. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, shields African markets, prioritizing local resources and innovation. The BRICS New Development Bank, Afreximbank, and the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPSS, break the Western monopoly on credit and trade. Africa is no longer reacting to external pressures, it's designing its own future. Redefining stability. France's crisis exposes the flaws of the Western economic model, once forced upon Africa. Stability, as Europe defined it, balanced budgets, low inflation, was a narrow metric that ignored justice and sustainability. Africa was judged by these standards, as if spreadsheets mattered more than food or electricity. But as France's €3.4 trillion debt fuels stagnation, Africa is redefining stability as resilience and adaptability. Ghana's shift to local value chains, Rwanda's focus on governance, and Kenya's investment in infrastructure show a new philosophy. Stability isn't about foreign approval, it's about domestic production and flexibility. While France's centralized systems paralyze it, Africa's decentralized, experimental approach thrives. Lagos builds startups while Paris debates austerity. Kigali implements reforms while Brussels argues. Africa's volatility is dynamism. Europe's order is stagnation. A new global narrative. France's economic implosion is a civilizational reckoning. The West's strength came from extracting Africa's wealth and lecturing it on productivity. That cycle is breaking. Africa is reclaiming its mines, replacing foreign currencies and rewriting rules. As France struggles with its deficit, Africa builds sovereign refineries and regional networks. The student has outgrown the teacher. This shift is global. Russia, China, Turkey, and India recognize Africa's rising influence. Latin America and Southeast Asia mirror its strategies. Africa is no longer a metaphor for dependency. It's a blueprint for post-colonial resilience. While Europe clings to nostalgia, Africa embraces necessity, forged in centuries of survival. The irony is poetic. As Paris dims, Ouagadougou shines. As the euro wobbles, the African Union stands taller. France's debt crisis reveals not just a financial failure, but a moral one. The empire that preached discipline is now its own cautionary tale. Africa, once dismissed, is writing the future, one where independence, not domination, defines progress. The world is pivoting, and the torch is passing to those who earned it.